In the next session, we discover how automated intelligence comes together across tactical, operational, and strategic security functions to better defend against the adversary in a cloud-based world. Maria Bradberg is the Chief Strategy Officer of Recorded Future. She has spent her entire career in tech. She is a board member and advisor to startups across the globe. Welcome, Marie. The stage is yours.
Keep talking, keep talking. Here we go, keep going.
We-
Let's check it's on.
Okay now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Makes you feel very special. Okay, nice. Thank you all for coming. My name is Marie Bradberg, as mentioned. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Recorded Future. Maybe some of you listened to my colleague Julius a little bit earlier, where he started to tease out some of the topics that I will cover today. I have a vision, and that is that in the future, the world will be a much more secure place than what it is today, and I believe that intelligence is a core piece of that. That's why I believe that we live in the age of intelligence. So I will unpack that message for you for the next 20 minutes or so. But before diving into it, I wanted to show you this. It might seem a little weird that someone who is an intelligence professor says that intelligence is dead. But for those of you who might know the origin of this expression, the king is dead, long live the new king, might understand what I'm trying to tease out. And this is one of my core messages today, and I will get back to it. But I wanted to start with it just to get you thinking about it a little bit. I will be talking about the world a lot today. I already mentioned it, the secure world. So let me just spend a little time defining the world, the way that I view it. It's my claim that everything eventually ends up on the internet, as you can see that this picture is illustrating. You have all of that data coming from the physical world going up into the internet and becoming a digital version of the world. More or less every single piece of data that we produce every day and that we store somewhere will eventually end up there. It doesn't really matter what format it is, where we put it. If it was ever intended to end up on the internet or not, it's going to end up there. And that's why all our secrets, all our IP lives on the internet. It's also where our money lives today and where our money transacts. The internet is really becoming a reflection of the world. And of course, if you are in the business of crime, you are going to exploit the fact. In fact, we've actually made it really, really easy to exploit this fact. The internet is also, these days, where relationships between human beings are born. And it's where opinion is planted, it's where opinion can be amplified. The physical meeting on planet Earth isn't really needed anymore. We have products like these that help us facilitate these types of communications. And as you may know, the business models of these types of products don't necessarily take humanity, or doesn't put humanity in the first room. It's not the top priority. So what ends up happening is that the internet becomes an attack vector that launches onto the physical world as well, just like this picture demonstrates. This is from the storming of the Capitolium in Washington, D.C. Last year, where an internet mob reached the physical building, that is the Capitolium, threatened that physical building, and also, more importantly, the human beings who worked in this building. So I think as we move forward from a threat perspective, we're going to see a lot more of this. So I think it's fair to say that in the next 10, 15 years or so, the physical world is going to become more of a reflection of the internet. And we need to be aware of that. So when you think about the threat landscape in this context, you have to think about it this way. It's no longer about the specific cyber attacks the way that we know them. It's not only about breaking into the networks, planting the malware, etc., etc. It's also about the geopolitical and kinetic threats, like the example I just showed. And it's also about those influence operation threats that causes those types of attacks. And the most sophisticated adversaries that we know, they know how to synchronize attacks across all of these areas, which means the threat is actually converging. And the precursor can be found in any one of those. This is, of course, a very top-of-mind example of this, carried out in a really neat way. This is a snapshot from February 24th, where the invasion of Ukraine started. It includes all of those areas. You've got the computer wipers that were sent out. You had the missiles starting to actually fall, so the physical threat, and Russia working really, really hard to control the narrative of why this invasion was necessary. So it's an example that is, of course, top of mind for everyone and easy to exemplify this with. And the thing is that this continues. The specific example, the attacks, the cyber attacks are now starting to spread outside of the Ukraine, going on to those countries who sympathize with Ukraine, for example. The physical or infrastructure threat is also continuing. It's taking different shapes and forms. And the influence operation campaigns, or the attempts to control the narrative, also happening. And when we see those types of things, we have to think of them. What are the precursors of? So the world from a corporate perspective, what's happening there? I think what we're witnessing, and have been witnessing over the last 5, maybe 10 years, is nothing less than an epic move from the corporate network onto the cloud. COVID obviously catalyzing this plenty. But what we're ending up with is, defenders across the globe having to keep track of their infrastructure now being spread all over the internet. And it's not just infrastructure, databases, systems, but it's also services. More or less every single business process that we rely on today to run our businesses efficiently are hosted in the cloud and run in the cloud by people we may or may not understand is actually running them. So for every CISO around the world today, the challenge is to manage the threat surface in all of these different layers without any access to the telemetry that the corporate network used to provide. So it's a whole new world, which means that for every CISO or every defender, for CEOs, business leaders, every day is more or less characterized by this massive uncertainty about what's happening. Who is currently targeting me? Who's plotting to target me? How am I being targeted, or anyone in my industry or my suppliers for that matter? And I speak to CISOs every day whose job has completely changed since February 24th, getting now pulled into the executive management meetings, into the boardrooms, asked questions, and based on their answers, major business decisions are being made. And it's sort of a new world, especially here in this part of the world. And I don't really see how it's possible to do the job of a CISO today without having access to intelligence. It really is the only equalizer. It's really the only way to get ahead of the adversary. And it's the only way to really understand how to defend your business from a strategic and tactical operational perspective. So intelligence is the only equalizer, but that's only true if you consider intelligence from the right perspective. So intelligence is dead, long live the new intelligence. So intelligence that takes that entire threat landscape into account, that is all sourced, that collects all of that data, so that you can compute that data and find the signals that are relevant to you. Then intelligence can deliver. And I wanted to just be a little bit concrete what I mean here. This is an example from last year. There are plenty since then, of course, but it's an example of how changes in actor behaviors really forces defensive actions to also change or transform. So this is a picture from the arrest of some of the REVIL members last year. And I think the question here is, is this actually helping us or not when law enforcement go ahead and do this? And I think in this particular example, if you ask me, it's just a very good display of the Russian government recruiting tactics. But this happens across the globe. And I think we have to do it. We have to start arresting these types of actors. But unfortunately, it also drives the development that we're seeing, and that is, in this case, ransomware as a service. Because ransomware gangs today run their businesses as enterprises. So people affiliate with the group, and they do what they do best. Maybe they break into networks, maybe they deploy malware, maybe they are great ransomware negotiators, etc., etc. So when you think about this from an intelligence perspective and the traditional intelligence perspective, those handrails that we used to have, certain groups behave in certain ways, they use certain tactics, etc. All of those lines are blurred now. So basically, the business is optimized for unpredictability. And I think I've used the word exponential already. I often do when I talk about the threat. It's a doom and gloom situation. The threat is exponential. I don't think it's fair to use those expressions without actually putting numbers on it. So I've put some numbers here. Unfortunately, they're quite small. I don't know if you can see them. But if you are in intelligence and it's your job to keep track of actors, it's a job of keeping track of 10,000 plus actors. It's what you have to do. And then if you want to understand what type of malware they're using, it's another 150,000 data points. And then moving on to the vulnerabilities that those are exploiting and the products that those vulnerabilities belong to, and even worse, who they are targeting, or the attack surface of who they're targeting. We're in the millions. So we're really getting into a problem that is exponential, and it's a long time ago since this was possible to solve for in a manual fashion. Intelligence the old way. Today, it's a big data problem, it's an analytics problem. And when I was putting this together, I was reminded of a conversation that I was having with one of the general managers at Microsoft over in Seattle. And he said, everyone says data is the new oil. It's not true. Data is the new sand. And his point was that you can have all the data in the world, but if it's just sitting there in a pile, it's not worth anything. You have to structure it, and you have to run analysis on it. And then you can get value from it. And of course, the a leader from the biggest cloud company in the world is going to say that. But it's really true. It's really true for intelligence as well. Because if you want to solve for that exponential problem, or the infinite attack surface that we really have today, you have to get all the data that the bad guys are leaving behind on the internet. You have to collect all of that data, and then you have to structure it into some sort of a structure, preferably a knowledge graph, which is why I have beautifully illustrated here on the slide. I've also put it on a black background to get a clue back to that the world runs on the internet, or the digital world. So it's the world. It's a digital version of the world in a knowledge graph represented. And if you do this, and you run the right analytics on top of it, you can start finding the signals. So in this case, a signal has triggered for a company called Nokia, which is the company everybody knows about. And that can be interesting if you happen to be Nokia, or if you rely on Nokia. If you're not Nokia, probably not so interesting. But when it really gets interesting is when you can define your own attack surface and start subscribing to signals that are relevant to you and only to you. So I'm talking about your own assets, the products you use, your brands, all your third-party suppliers, and how they connect in this digital world, including what nation they may belong to. What is the political relationships with that country and another country, basically. When you have this, intelligence really starts to deliver. And that's why the modern security stack, or the modern cloud security stack, includes intelligence. You have to have your endpoint protection in place, of course, to be able to block and prevent. You have to have your vulnerability products in place in order to do vulnerability prioritization appropriately. You got to have your SIM product in place, and you need your SOAR. But without intelligence, you're not going to be able to automate enough to actually be defending appropriately. So intelligence is a part of the modern cloud security stack. So towards the end, I just wanted to move up a couple of levels, I guess. We've been pretty deep down now into the specifics. What we're really talking about here is to get an understanding as a defender for the adversary. Who are they? What are their tactics? What are their intents? How are they going about carrying out their attacks? What's the infrastructure that they are using? And who are they targeting? Are they targeting me? Are they targeting someone that I rely on? Any of my third parties, etc.? And to be able to see this entire through line. And as you all know, this changes every second. Going back to that graph model. It changes every second, so you have to be able to understand this in real time. And when I say we have to be able to understand this, I'm not just talking about the human beings or the analysts. Your machines, your tech stack has to understand this. So the consumption of this type of intelligence is also a core piece of the puzzle. And just one final thing that I'm going to make, or point I'm going to make with this slide, is that I said it in the beginning that I believe that we're going to live in a much more secure world in the future, and that intelligence is a core piece of that. That's because intelligence plays a role in every single security use case in the enterprise. If you're thinking about ransomware that we talked about, identity, espionage, third party, etc., etc., intelligence plays a really important role. So just to summarize, I believe that we live in the age of intelligence. And when I say that, I mean that the world runs on the internet. The world is digitalized. The threat surface is more or less infinite as it is spread all over that internet in all the different layers. The threat is converging and is growing exponentially, both in terms of volume and sophistication. And intelligence is really the only way to close the gap and to get ahead and become a proactive defender. And then, of course, at the end, intelligence is dead, long live intelligence. That's all I had. Thank you for your time.